Close your eyes for just a moment. Try to recall the distinct, metallic clink of a 2-forint coin dropping into the slot of a red, glass-paned public telephone booth. Or perhaps remember the sharp, sweet smell of citrus peel filling your small kitchen just days before Christmas, after waiting hours in the freezing cold just to buy a single bag of oranges. Welcome back, my friends, to the 1980s in Hungary. Today we are taking a gentle journey back to our youth. We are going to explore 20 everyday habits and rituals that were completely normal to us back then, but which today seem entirely absurd or impossible to explain to the younger generations. These were the little things that defined our days, tested our patience, and ultimately brought us closer together. And wait until we reach the very last memory on this list, because it is a musical ritual that I am certain will transport you straight back to your teenage bedroom, waiting with bated breath by the radio. Before we begin our list, let us remember how time itself felt different back then. In the 1970s and 80s, life in our country moved at a much slower, more deliberate pace. We did not have smartphones buzzing in our pockets or instant access to everything we desired. Instead, we had the beautiful, often frustrating art of waiting. People today often look back and assume that because we lacked modern technology and endless consumer goods, our lives must have been empty. But you and I know the truth. Our lives were incredibly rich with genuine human connection. Because we could not just send a text message, we showed up at each other's doors. Because we could not buy everything at once, we cherished the things we finally obtained. The world was less artificial. The fabrics we wore, the food we cooked, and the conversations we had carried a certain weight and honesty. We are not just looking back at old habits today. We are looking back at a time when patience was a daily practice, and when happiness was found not in having it all, but in sharing what little we had with the people we loved. Let us begin with a habit that modern generations simply cannot comprehend. Imagine sitting down on a Monday evening, turning on your heavy television set, and seeing absolutely nothing. In 1980s Hungary, there were no television broadcasts on Mondays. None at all. Instead of feeling frustrated, families accepted this as a completely normal part of the weekly rhythm. The television screen would just show a silent test pattern. But this absence created something beautiful. Mondays became the designated time for living your real life. This was the evening when mothers knitted, fathers read the newspaper or tinkered with the radio, and children played board games like Gazdálkodj Okosan on the living room carpet. Neighbors would knock on the door without calling first, simply to share a slice of freshly baked cake or to chat over a strong, dark espresso served in tiny glass cups. The silence of the television forced us to listen to one another. The ticking of the wall clock became the background music to deep conversations. Today, when we have thousands of channels available 24 hours a day, the idea of a mandatory day without screens seems absurd. But looking back, that weekly pause was a true gift. It kept our families talking, our minds imagining, and our homes filled with the genuine sounds of human connection. Now, let us remember the incredible, seemingly absurd ritual of buying a car. Today, you walk into a dealership and drive away the same day. But back then, dealing with the Merkur company was a true test of endurance. If you wanted a Trabant, a Lada, or a Wartburg, you did not just buy it. You applied for it, paid a massive deposit, and then you waited. And waited. Sometimes you waited 5 whole years for a simple piece of paper in the mail telling you your car was finally ready. The entire family would celebrate the arrival of that postcard like a holiday. When you finally went to the collection point, you could not even pick the color. If a pale yellow or a baby blue Trabant was rolling off the lot, that was your new car. You accepted it with overwhelming joy. And oh, the distinct smell of that 2-stroke engine. The rattling sound it made as it drove down the street, trailing a thin cloud of blue smoke. People cared for these cars as if they were members of the family. Fathers would spend their entire weekends in the garage, polishing the steering wheel and fixing the engine with basic tools. The sheer absurdity of waiting half a decade for a tiny plastic car is lost on today's youth. But to us, it taught the ultimate lesson in appreciating what you have. Do you remember the legendary shopping expeditions across the border to Vienna in the late 80s? This was an era when owning a Western household appliance was the ultimate symbol of success. The most iconic of these was the Gorenje chest freezer. It became a nationwide phenomenon. Families would pack into their tiny Lada or Trabant, drive across the border at Hegesz-Halom, and spend all their carefully saved Western currency. But the truly absurd part was the journey home. Picture the Hungarian highways filled with small, struggling cars, each proudly carrying a massive, heavy white Gorenje freezer strapped precariously to the roof rack. It looked ridiculous, but it was a badge of honor. Bringing that freezer into the home was a communal event. Neighbors would come over just to look at it, marveling at its pristine white surface and the gentle, quiet hum of its motor. It represented a connection to a world beyond our borders. We would fill those freezers with slaughtered pigs, summer fruits, and homemade sausages, ensuring the family was fed through the winter. The lengths we went to, the borders we crossed, and the ridiculous sights of cars buckling under the weight of household appliances remain a deeply nostalgic, absurd memory of our collective past. Let us talk about a treat that brings a smile to anyone who was a child in those days. I'm talking about Limo powder. It was designed to be mixed with water to create a refreshing, fruity lemonade. But no child in Hungary ever actually drank it that way. The true ritual was entirely different and slightly absurd. We would buy that little plastic bottle, shaped like a tiny barrel or a flask, tear off the top with our teeth, and pour the dry, brightly colored powder directly onto our tongues. It was intensely sweet, sharply sour, and incredibly artificial. It would instantly dye your tongue bright red, yellow, or green. We would walk around the schoolyard proudly sticking our colorful tongues out at each other. Sometimes, the sourness was so intense it would make you cough, a dry puff of sugary dust escaping your lips. The rough texture of the powder melting into a sticky paste in your mouth is a sensory memory that is impossible to forget. We spent our precious pocket money on this completely unhealthy, magical dust. Today, parents would be horrified by the ingredients, but for us, a plastic bottle of dry Limo powder was the ultimate playground currency, a tiny burst of rebellious joy in our pockets. Another quiet, beautiful obsession of our youth was the careful collection of paper napkins. If you mention napkin collecting to a teenager today, they will look at you with total confusion. But in our time, a beautifully printed paper napkin was a treasure. Young girls and even adults would keep thick, heavy photo albums where, instead of photographs, they meticulously organized flattened napkins. We had strict categories: floral patterns, animals, Christmas themes, and the most prized possessions of all, the Western napkins brought by a relative from a trip abroad. They felt different, softer, with brighter colors. We would bring our albums to school or to a friend's house and engage in serious negotiations. I will trade you 2 dotted ones for that one with the golden bells. We never used these napkins to wipe our mouths. That would be a tragedy. They were preserved behind plastic film, smoothed out by hand, admired for their artwork. It was a hobby that cost almost nothing, yet it brought us together. It taught us to find beauty in the most ordinary, fragile things. The smell of the old paper and the soft rustle of turning the pages of a napkin album is a sensory memory of a much gentler, quieter time. Do you recall the intense, almost manic energy of the mandatory school paper drives? Twice a year, the whole country seemed to mobilize for the papiergutes. This was not just a chore. It was a fierce competition between classes and schools. We would spend weeks going door to door in our neighborhoods, politely asking neighbors if they had any old newspapers or magazines. Then came the physical labor. We would carefully stack the newspapers, tie them incredibly tight with rough twine, and drag them to the schoolyard. You would see children pulling little wooden carts, old strollers, or simply dragging heavy bundles of paper across the pavement. The schoolyard would transform into a mountain of old paper. The smell of damp newsprint, dust, and old ink filled the air. We watched with bated breath as the massive scale weighed our class's contribution. The winning class might get a day off, a cake, or just sheer bragging rights. Today, recycling is a sterile, automated process. But back then, it was a communal, physical effort that required teamwork, sweat, and a lot of dirty hands. We felt like we were doing something crucial, and the sight of those towering paper mountains remains etched in our memories forever. When we talk about the flavors of the past, there is one dish that stands above all others in its simplicity and sheer perfection. Gyros kenyér, or bread with lard. Today, health trends would condemn it, but back then, it was the cornerstone of our diet. It was the ultimate comfort food, the quick dinner, and the necessary snack at every house party or gathering. But there was a ritual to it. You needed a thick, hearty slice of fresh white bread, with a crust so crusty it would scratch the roof of your mouth. Then, a generous layer of pork or goose lard was spread across it. The magic happened with the toppings. A heavy dusting of sweet red Hungarian paprika, turning the surface a vibrant crimson. And finally, the sharp, pungent bite of thinly sliced red onions arranged on top. The smell of the raw onions mixing with the earthy paprika is the aroma of 1980s hospitality. We ate it sitting on the porch at the summer house or standing in the kitchen late at night. The grease would inevitably drip down your fingers. It was cheap, it was filling, and it brought people together. Sharing a tray of gyros kenyér was an act of friendship, a simple, delicious habit that needed no plates or fancy cutlery, just good company. Let us step inside one of those iconic public phone booths. Before cell phones, making a call away from home was a physical, sensory adventure. You would enter the booth, pulling the heavy glass door shut, instantly enveloped in the lingering smell of stale tobacco smoke and old paper from the torn phone book hanging on a chain. You held the heavy black receiver to your ear and listened for the deep, humming dial tone. Then came the currency of connection, the tantush, or later, the large, heavy 2-forint coin. You would drop it into the slot and wait for that mechanical clinking sound. It meant the machine was ready. Dialing the rotary phone took time, your finger spinning the plastic wheel all the way to the metal stop, then waiting for it to smoothly rotate back. If the person answered, a loud mechanical click would drop your coin into the machine's belly. If they did not, you pressed a heavy button to retrieve your precious coin, feeling a wave of disappointment. Conversations were quick, often rushed because there was always someone waiting outside, tapping their watch. The phone booth was a place of secrets, hurried confessions and sweet romances, all dependent on the weight of a single coin. Another undeniable part of our childhood economy was the meticulous return of empty bottles. In retro Hungary, throwing away a glass bottle was unthinkable. Every single bottle of beer, wine, or mineral water had a deposit value. We children saw this as our personal gold mine. We would gather empty bottles from the kitchen, carefully washing them out, because the strict clerk at the store would reject any dirty ones. We carried them in woven plastic bags that clinked loudly with every step we took. The local store had a dedicated window for bottle returns, the üvegvissaváltó. The smell there was unmistakable, a sour mix of spilled beer and sugary soda. We handed the bottles over one by one, watching the clerk quickly sort them into plastic crates. In return, we received small aluminium coins or paper receipts that felt like massive wealth. We would immediately take our earnings to buy a scoop of ice cream or a bottle of Bambi. It taught us the value of money, the importance of taking care of things, and the joy of working for a small reward. Today, you just toss a plastic bottle in a bin, but for us, returning glass bottles was the first step into the adult world of commerce. If you grew up in this era, you know exactly how much power a pair of shoes could hold. I am talking about the legendary Tisza cipő. Today, sneakers are a dime a dozen, but back then, having the right athletic shoe was everything. The Tisza shoe, with its distinctive T logo sweeping across the side, was the ultimate status symbol of the Hungarian youth. They were practical, incredibly durable, and smelled strongly of fresh, thick rubber and canvas. We wore them everywhere, to school, to the mandatory gym classes, and to play football on the concrete courts until the soles wore completely smooth. Getting a new pair was a rare and special event. You would proudly lace them up, knowing that everyone in the classroom was looking at your feet. The contrast of the white leather against the bold blue or red lines felt incredibly stylish. While the Western world had their imported brands, we had our Tisza shoes, and we wore them with fierce pride. They were not just footwear, they were a badge of belonging to our generation. The feeling of slipping your feet into a stiff new pair of Tisza shoes is a memory that still brings a warm, nostalgic smile. When summer arrived and the heat became unbearable, we did not go to the supermarket to buy plastic bottles of juice. Instead, the mothers and grandmothers of Hungary transformed their kitchens into sticky, sweet-smelling factories to make homemade soap or fruit syrup. The ritual was labor-intensive but incredibly rewarding. Huge, heavy glass jars would line the kitchen counters. We children were sent to pick raspberries, red currants or elderflowers until our fingers were stained dark purple. The kitchen would fill with the intoxicating, boiling scent of fruit and massive amounts of sugar. The syrup was carefully poured into old, repurposed glass bottles and sealed tight. When winter came, opening one of those bottles was like opening a jar of summer sunlight. A small pour of the thick, brightly coloured syrup into a glass, topped with sparkling water from a heavy soda siphon, created the most magical drink in the world. The sticky counters, the endless stirring, and the sweet reward of a perfect glass of raspberry syrup made us appreciate the seasons and the hard work of our families in a way that simply buying a carton of juice today could never replicate. Let us turn the dial and listen to the past. The Sokol radio, a small, heavy rectangle encased in a brown leather cover with a handle. It was not just a device, it was our window to the world. The ritual of using a Sokol radio was all about patience and a delicate touch. You would slowly spin the small plastic dial, moving through a sea of loud static, whistles and crackles, trying to find a clear signal. The sound quality was tinny and harsh, yet it was the most beautiful sound in the world when you finally caught the right frequency. Fathers would carry it to the weekend garden, placing it carefully on a wooden table while they worked. Teenagers would hide under their blankets late at night, trying to tune into Radio-Free Europe or catch a forbidden Western rock song through the heavy interference. The smell of the warm leather case and the physical sensation of trying to lock onto a fading signal made listening to music or the news a true event. Today, digital music is perfect and instantly available, but we love the imperfections of the Sokol radio. We love the thrill of the hunt, the crackling static that made every clear note feel like a hard-won victory. Do you remember the 1st of May? The Mayalis was not just a day off from school or work. It was an enormous, mandatory, yet surprisingly joyful public ritual. We would gather early in the morning, dressed in our best clothes, holding small paper flags on thin wooden sticks. The streets were filled with the sound of marching bands and endless streams of people. But the true magic of the May Day parades happened after the marching was done. The parks would transform into massive open-air festivals. The air was thick with the scent of cheap draft beer, cotton candy, and the star of the show, the boiled Würstli. We would stand in long lines to get a pair of frankfurters served on a flimsy white paper plate, accompanied by a thick dollop of bright yellow mustard and a slice of thick white bread. You had to eat it standing up, balancing the plate while trying not to spill mustard on your shirt. The Würstli always had a specific snap to it, and the mustard was sharp and tangy. There was music playing from crackling loudspeakers, and everyone seemed to be laughing. Despite the political nature of the day, the Mahalis became a celebration of community, simple food, and the arrival of spring. We must talk about the magic of the Christmas oranges. For children growing up today, bananas and oranges are available all year round, piled high in supermarkets. But for us in retro Hungary, tropical fruit was a rare, almost mythical treasure. These fruits only appeared in the weeks leading up to Christmas. The rumour would spread through the neighbourhood that the local kozert had received a shipment. People would drop everything and run to stand in a line that stretched out the door and around the street corner, shivering in the freezing December air. You were only allowed to buy a limited amount. When you finally brought that brown paper bag home, the smell of the citrus peel seemed to fill the entire apartment. We did not just eat these fruits casually, we savoured them. The peel was carefully saved and dried on the top of the radiator to make the room smell festive. The orange segments were divided equally among the children, eaten slowly, piece by piece. The vibrant colour of a banana against the grey winter backdrop was a symbol of the holidays. The absurdity of waiting hours for a single orange is real, but it made those fruits taste sweeter than any fruit we have ever eaten since. Another fundamental part of our culture was the weekend telek, the small allotment garden on the outskirts of the city or near a lake. By Friday afternoon, the roads were packed with heavily loaded cars escaping the concrete blocks of the city. The telek was our sanctuary, but it was also a place of endless work. We did not hire contractors to build our summer houses. Fathers and uncles built the small wooden sheds, or sufnit, entirely by hand, using leftover materials, mismatched bricks, and sheer determination. The weekends were spent digging, planting tomatoes, and pruning fruit trees. The smell of turned earth, sunburned skin, and mosquito repellent was the perfume of our summers. We had no running water inside, just a garden hose or an outdoor pump that squeaked loudly. Dinners were cooked outdoors over an open fire in a bograch. It was exhausting work, yet it was our greatest joy. We were proud of every twisted cucumber and every jar of pickled vegetables we produced. The telek forced us out into nature, away from the television, and gave us a deep, physical connection to the land and to our families. It was our private, handmade paradise. Let us pour a glass of nostalgia and talk about the king of Hungarian soft drinks, the Traubi soda. The moment you saw that iconic, textured green glass bottle, you knew it was a special occasion. We did not drink sodas every day. They were reserved for birthdays, weddings, or a Sunday lunch at a restaurant. The waiter would bring the chilled bottle to the table, and the sound of the metal cap popping off was like music. As the pale, golden liquid poured into the glass, the intense fizz would tickle your nose. The smell was uniquely sweet, capturing the essence of ripe autumn grapes. It was distinct from any Western cola. It tasted like home. We would sip it slowly, trying to make the glass last as long as possible. The heavy green glass bottle felt substantial in your hand, a premium product in a world of simple goods. Afterward, the bottle was always returned, of course. Today, the market is flooded with endless flavors in disposable plastic, but nothing will ever compare to the crisp, grape-flavored bite of a cold Traubi soda on a hot summer afternoon, shared with the people you loved. If you were a schoolchild in the 70s or 80s, you undoubtedly remember the daily ritual of the pioneer tie. Whether you were a younger Kishtabosh with your bright blue tie, or an older Utturu wearing the crimson red, putting it on was a precise morning habit. You stood in front of the mirror, carefully folding the slippery silk fabric, wrapping it around your collar and securing it perfectly. The tie had to be ironed flawlessly, with no wrinkles allowed. We wore them with white shirts during assemblies, standing in perfectly straight lines on the schoolyard, listening to speeches and singing marching songs. The fabric had a very specific, slightly chemical smell when it was new. We learned how to salute, and we carried little blue booklets that tracked our good deeds and behaviour. While today we look back at the political undertones of the pioneer movement, for us as children, it was simply about belonging. It was about going to summer camps, singing around massive campfires, and feeling like we were part of a giant team. The physical act of tying that red or blue knot every morning is a deeply ingrained muscle memory of our youth. Now, let us recall the unmistakable, powerful scent of cleaning day. Before the shelves were filled with dozens of specialized gentle cleaning products, Hungarian households relied heavily on one absolute giant, ultra washing powder. It came in a simple paper box or plastic bag, and it was used for absolutely everything. Mothers washed the clothes with it, scrubbed the kitchen floor with it, and even used it to clean heavily greased hands after working on the car. The smell was sharp, chemical, and incredibly clean. It was an abrasive, tough powder. If you washed dishes with it, it would leave your hands feeling rough and dry. We did not have fancy washing machines with delicate cycles. Washing was a physical battle against dirt, fought in the bathtub, or a heavy Haidu washing machine that shook the entire bathroom floor. The scent of Ultra, combined with the steam filling the small bathroom, meant that the house was in order. It represents the hard-working hands of our mothers and grandmothers, who kept our clothes spotless and our homes shining, relying on sheer physical effort and that one universally powerful green and yellow box. Do you remember the absolute thrill of going to the Scala or Centrum department stores? Shopping there was an event, a complicated ritual that required strategy. The moment you walked through the heavy glass doors, you were hit by the specific department store smell, a mix of new textiles, cheap cosmetics, and warm dust. You could hear the constant jingle of the cash registers and the low hum of the escalators, which were a marvel in themselves. But the buying process was absurd by today's standards. You did not just pick up an item and pay for it. First, you stood in line at the counter to ask the assistant to give you a slip of paper for the item. Then, you walked to a completely different line at the central cashier, waiting to pay the money. Finally, you took your stamped receipt back to the original counter, waited in line a third time, and only then were you handed your purchase. It was inefficient, crowded, and took hours. But walking out onto the street carrying a plastic bag with the Scala Corpe logo on it made you feel like you had truly accomplished something grand. And finally, we arrive at the most sacred, most intense, and perhaps the most absurd ritual of our teenage years: recording music onto a cassette tape from the radio. In an era without internet, this was the only way to build a music collection. You would buy a blank polymer or TDK cassette, insert it into your tape recorder, and sit by the radio for hours, usually listening to Danubius or Petafy radio. You had to hover your fingers delicately over the play and record buttons, waiting in total silence. The tension was immense. When your favorite song finally started, you pressed the buttons as fast as humanly possible. But the true enemy was the radio DJ. You prayed, silently screaming at the radio, begging the DJ not to talk over the intro or the outro of the song. When they did, it ruined the recording, but you kept it anyway. We all had mixtapes filled with the hissing sound of radio static, abruptly cut-off endings, and the voice of a presenter interrupting a guitar solo. If the tape got tangled, we painstakingly wound it back inside using a hexagonal pencil. We cherished those imperfect, chaotic mixtapes more than any playlist today. They were made with patience, frustration, and deep love. As we look back at these 20 habits, it becomes clear that we do not just miss the old objects. We miss the people we were when we used them. We miss the feeling of our youth, the slower flow of time, and the deep, tangible connections we shared with one another. We miss a world where things had weight, where waiting made the rewards sweeter, and where a simple slice of bread with lard or a clear radio signal could bring immense joy. The absurdity of these habits is exactly what makes them so precious. They remind us that happiness does not come from convenience, but from the shared human experience. Thank you for taking this beautiful, nostalgic journey back to 1980s Hungary with me. If these memories brought a warm feeling to your heart, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like so we can continue preserving our history together. Now, it is your turn to speak. Which of these 20 memories resonated with you the most? Or what absurd habit from your childhood did I forget to mention? Please, write your personal stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and I cannot wait to sharing your memories.